So the next assignment is a fundamental freedoms essay, and it goes as follows. LFA number 2, create a 250 to 750 word, which is about 3 pages, persuasive essay on which fundamental freedom from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the most important freedom to have in a democracy. Your persuasive essay must do the following. Choose one of the fundamental freedoms from the Charter, which is freedom of conscience or religion, thought or expression, peaceful assembly, or association. So it's not all three, all four. You choose one of them. B, explain why that freedom is important to our democracy. Use case law to support your reasoning, and I'll talk about how to do that later. So when examining this, we're looking at, again, these A1 and A2 are the ones we always do because those are sort of core things you always learn in law, no matter what union you're in. But for this section, you are looking at C1 to explain the legal significance of the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Ontario Human Rights and the Code, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the Canadian Human Rights Act. To analyze the various factors influence and to continue to influence the development of human rights law in Canada. To analyze the relationship between formal legal recognition of rights and freedom of Canada and those rights that have been interpreted and protected by the practice. And to analyze which of the situations may be appropriate to limit rights and freedoms and to explain the arguments against such limitations. Okay, when I'm working, I'm looking for these following things. Number one, I know that for knowledge and understanding. I know what the fundamental freedoms of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms are. Of rights and freedom are, and can I find them in my own words? That's conversation, again, through looking at your work, talking to you about it, going through feedback. I mark that section there. I know the difference between each of the fundamental freedoms and can identify why one is more important than the others. Again, that's what you're marked on. For thinking, I know I must choose one of the fundamental freedoms for my essay and describe why it's more important than the others. I know that I must use a case study to support my reasoning. I know that my essay must have a clear thesis statement in the first paragraph. So 3 things. One, you establish which one you think is more important. You're not saying they're not important. You're just simply saying this one is probably the most important of the 4. You need to have a case study to support your position, which means that you're going to have to look at old cases, and again, each of these fundamental freedoms are tied to a case, and you're going to explain how that case helped to explain why that freedom is important. And the next one is your essay must use a clear statement in the first paragraph. So you got to be able to establish in the first paragraph, in the last sentence, what you're going to prove for your essay. I know that my essay should use proper spelling and grammar, and I know that my essay is clear, easily understood, and uses appropriate legal terminology, which means make sure that you understand it, it's clear, and that you're using the right legal terminology for the assignment. I know that I must use a legal research process, which is gather research, organize thoughts into a legal argument position, present legal argument position. To complete this assignment for evaluation, work must be done in front of my teacher when possible. So that's simply like the writing process, but it's just designed in a way to talk about what you would do in a law form if you're a lawyer. You need to gather your research to make your argument, then organize your thoughts into a position, and then you must present your position argument. Right, same idea, which is outline, rough draft, final draft. Okay. I'm going to do a new share, and it should click over with no interruptions. Oh, okay. Can everyone see that? Can everyone see? Okay. And online, can you guys see what I've got on the smartboard?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so the next part, again, is just the success criteria. So it's a question. The goal, which is, I'll repeat it again. I'm not going to read it again. But let's go through the different steps. The goal, Tell me which of the four fundamental freedoms is the most important. You must use sound reasoning and case study to prove your point. So this is your ability to show me what you think is most important. And again, if you're a lawyer, to make your argument based on sound logical reasoning and some actual hard evidence or a case that could say this is why it's so important. So the first step is choose the fundamental freedom. You have an understanding of each of the fundamental freedoms, what they cover and their goals, which one you believe will be the easiest to write and the most interested in. So when choosing it, you try to understand what each of those fundamental freedoms are, and then you have to think about which one do you think I can write easily, and which one do you think that you're most interested in. This is a technique to say that choose the one that you think you're most interested in because it'll be better to make you'll make a better essay than me saying you're doing freedom of assembly and you're doing consciousness and religion. You need to choose the one you want. I don't care if everyone chooses the first one or A, B, C, or D. Doesn't matter to me. Just make sure you choose one. Next is research. Find out any cases connected to that freedom. Look and understand what decision made. As what decision. Look and understand what the decision made said about that freedom. Right. So, for example, every single one has in your digital textbook. When you go back and look at each individual section, there's going to be a case tied to it. Right. So freedom of thought and expression, it's R versus Irwin Toy Company, and it's also R versus Keegstra. So let's say you chose that one, you would choose one of those cases to make your argument. And again, the textbook will have a little reading section where it sort of breaks down the case, the summary, what was the decision, and why it was made. All right? Look for why the freedom is important by connecting the decision to what it says about the right. Okay? So you want to make sure that you connect the influence of the freedom versus what it says about the actual right. So, for example, Keegstra was the one where he was teaching his kids that the Holocaust didn't happen, and he argued the freedom of freedom of thought, expression, and thing. The charter says yes, you do have that right. Yes, you do have the right to express that. However, that right can be limited, right? So you can explain that this is the most important right because the ability to one, speak in a society is important, and two, if society is able to establish where the boundaries are for that speech is also important, right? So we allow for speech, but we don't allow for hate speech, right? We allow for critique, we don't allow for slander, okay? So it's the idea that if you argue freedom of expression, an opinion was important because it's about establishing what you can say and creating reasonable boundaries for things that go over the line. Again, I'm not telling you to do that one, but that's an example of how I would have framed it if I were writing an essay. Okay, the writing process. You've got a 4-paragraph essay. So your first paragraph is introduction. You talk about a concept of freedom, right? What does freedom mean? Why freedom is important? And then you go to fundamental freedoms in Canada. You identify that in Canada, in our Constitution, we think there are 4 core freedoms that people need to have within Canada. Then you have your specific thesis statement. Freedom of whatever it is the most important fundamental freedom that we have. Okay? So in your opening paragraph, you're going to talk about freedom in general. They're going to talk about the 4 fundamental freedoms. You might want to allude why you think what evidence you're going to use to prove your point. And then your thesis statement is, this is why freedom of assembly is the most important freedom that we have. Okay? There is no right or wrong answer. I'm just looking at your ability to make an argument. Second paragraph, your fundamental freedom. Describe your freedom, discuss its goals and reason for existing, and give an example of a country without this freedom. Okay? So it's what the freedom is, why is it there, why does it exist, and here's how it here are some other countries where that freedom does not exist, right? And why that's not a good thing for your argument. That proves that it's important to have a democracy. You need this freedom. Third paragraph, case study. Just examine the book and look at cases, at least 2. You've described the dispute, the judicial decision, and what means made it when trying to determine that fundamental freedom. So basically, even when you look at the cases, it's kind of already described to you what happened, what the decision was, why the judges made the decision. It says at least two, which means study at least two, but you only need one case study for your actual essay. Right? Then in conclusion, explain why this freedom is important than the others. Describe a scenario that this freedom didn't exist and how it would impact our democracy. So two things. One, you sort of point the point that this is why it's an important freedom, and then you have to explain if that freedom didn't exist, how would that impact what happened within a democracy. So if you argue that freedom of assembly is the most important one, in the end you would talk about a society without freedom of assembly means that people cannot gather to voice their political opinion, to register dissent against the government, to purposely allow the government or to express the will of the people so the government can change and pivot. Right? Without that, you have basically people doing what they want when they want, without worrying about people outside the government yelling at them. Okay, so that is the example of what I would do for that situation. You repeat in the last paragraph what you've proven, and then you say if that freedom didn't exist, this is how it would impact the society. And remember, the argument you're making is that all of those. Well, one is you say is more important. Our charter says without these four, you can't have a democracy, right? You can't have it if those rights aren't protected. Okay, that's it from me. Does anyone have any questions about this? Let me check. I'm going to stop the share and recording now, guys who are online.